She woke up early, before the sun had even started to rise. The soft light of dawn had not yet touched the small garden outside the convent. The world still felt wrapped in a quiet, peaceful darkness. She moved slowly, carefully, as the years had made her body less forgiving. Every step through the stone corridors of the old convent carried a faint echo, and she liked it that way. It reminded her that life had rhythm, even in the quietest moments. She wore her habit, simple and plain, and tied it neatly around her waist. Each morning she followed the same routine, a rhythm that had become a part of her soul over decades. Breakfast was modest, a slice of bread and a cup of weak tea. She ate in silence, as she always did, listening to the distant sound of birds outside. After breakfast, she made her way to the chapel. The walls smelled faintly of old wood and candle wax, comforting in a way she could not explain. She knelt before the altar, clasped her hands, and prayed. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but the sincerity of her words seemed to fill the room. She prayed not only for herself, but for the people she had never met, for the strangers in the world, for those who were suffering. She had learned that true devotion was not loud or flashy, but quiet and constant. It was in these moments, alone with her thoughts and prayers, that she felt the most alive. Though the world outside often assumed otherwise, after her prayers, she went about her chores. She cleaned the floors, tended the small garden, and took care of the convent's library, a place filled with dusty books that had not been touched for years. The sisters often joked that she could read a book just by glancing at it, remembering every word and every detail. She smiled at their jokes, but said nothing. She preferred to let her actions speak louder than words. Age had taught her that silence often carried more power than speech. The other sisters were younger, full of energy and ambition. They often spoke about their plans, about the lives they wanted outside the convent, about the people they hoped to help. She listened patiently, offering advice when asked, but she rarely shared her own past. Few knew that before she had taken her vows, she had lived a very different life. She had once dreamed of performing on grand stages, of touching hearts with music. But that life was gone now, replaced by a life of devotion and service. She never spoke of it because she did not need to. Her music had found another home in the quiet moments, in the prayers, and in the gentle touch of her fingers when she played for herself. The convent was old and simple, with high ceilings and stone walls that carried the memory of centuries. She loved the structure because it reminded her that life, like the building, could endure the passage of time. She walked through the hallways slowly, stopping occasionally to adjust a picture or dust a shelf. Every movement was deliberate, each step measured. Some of the younger sisters hurried about, trying to do too much at once, but she had learned that rushing never truly achieved anything. Patience was her companion. She carried it with her like a warm shawl against the cold of the world. She often sat by the window in the afternoon, watching the light change across the courtyard. The sun moved slowly, casting long shadows that danced on the stone floors. She liked to watch the leaves in the garden, noticing the small details that others might miss, the way the morning dew sparkled on a single leaf, the gentle sway of a branch in the wind, the tiny insects that moved with purpose among the flowers. These moments were simple, yet they held a kind of magic that reminded her of life's beauty. She had learned to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, to find joy in the smallest of things. Sometimes the younger sisters would ask her to share stories of the past, of her life before the convent. She would smile softly and shake her head, saying only that some stories were meant to stay in the heart. They were curious, but she believed that everyone had their own journey, and that some parts of life were private, sacred even. She did not mind their curiosity. It reminded her that youth carries questions, and that the world is full of possibilities, yet unseen. Evenings were her favorite time. After the sun had set and the convent was quiet, she would sit at the old piano in the common room. The piano was worn, its keys slightly yellowed with age, but it had a voice that she loved. No one often asked her to play, and she did not play for an audience. She played for herself, letting the music fill the room and her soul. Her fingers moved with a grace that came from years of practice, a memory of a life that once was. Each note carried emotion, a story untold, a memory revisited. Music, she thought, was the language of the heart, and in these moments, her heart spoke freely. She had noticed how quickly people judged. Age, appearance, and silence often led others to assume a life had passed without achievement or purpose. She knew better. She had lived deeply and fully, even if the world had never seen it. Life, she believed, was not always about recognition or applause. Sometimes it was about quiet perseverance, about finding meaning in small, consistent acts of devotion. Her life in the convent had taught her that value is not always measured by external success, but by the integrity of one's heart. Her days were simple, but not lonely. She found companionship in her work, in the prayers and in the music that occasionally escaped her fingers. There was a rhythm to her life, a gentle ebb and flow that kept her grounded. Though her body was no longer as strong as it once had been, her spirit remained resilient. She moved with purpose, not out of necessity, but because she had found a reason to honor each day, each moment. Her presence was calming, like a soft light that did not demand attention but was impossible to ignore once noticed. She often thought about the world outside the convent walls. She knew it had changed drastically from the time before she took her vows. People moved quickly, lived hurried lives, and often overlooked the small, meaningful moments. She understood why. Life had a way of pulling people in many directions, leaving little time for reflection. But she had learned to resist that pull, to find stillness and purpose in the quiet corners of her life. That stillness, she believed, held a power that others rarely recognized at night. Before sleep, she would sit quietly in her room, reflecting on the day. She thought about the tasks she had completed, the prayers she had offered, and the moments of beauty she had noticed. She was content, not because life had been easy, but because she had embraced it fully. Every ache in her body, every wrinkle on her hands, told a story of a life lived with intention. She had learned that age was not a limitation, but a testament to resilience and experience. There was a quiet dignity in living fully, even if the world did not always acknowledge it, in the silence of the night. She felt connected to something larger than herself. The years had taught her that life is not measured by loud accomplishments or public recognition. True value lies in the quiet, persistent efforts to live with integrity, kindness, and devotion. She closed her eyes, letting her thoughts drift like leaves on a gentle stream. Sleep came slowly, wrapped around her like a soft blanket, and she felt at peace knowing that each day she lived, each small action she took, mattered in ways the world might never see. This was her life, simple, quiet, full of unseen purpose. People might look at her and see only age, only stillness, only routine. They did not know the depth of her experiences, the richness of her past, or the strength of her present. They could not see that within her, beneath the calm exterior, lived a life of quiet passion, of hidden talent, of unwavering dedication. She was ready for whatever the world might ask of her next, even if she did not yet know it. She had learned that life's most profound moments often come quietly, without warning, and she was prepared to embrace them when they arrived. One morning, a letter arrived at the convent neatly placed on the wooden table in the entrance hall. It was from the organizers of a local charity event, a gathering that welcomed the community to hear performances, speeches, and see demonstrations of talent. The younger sisters were excited, talking about what they could contribute. Some wanted to sing, others thought about reading poetry or performing small plays. As the sisters debated, their eyes fell on the elderly nun who sat quietly near the window, her hands folded. Observing the discussion with calm interest, perhaps she could perform, one sister said lightly, almost as a joke. But she is too old. We do not even know if she wants to. Others laughed, imagining a slow, unpracticed performance that would barely make it through a few notes. The elderly nun's presence seemed too still, too gentle, to imagine her in front of a crowd. The sisters teased and debated, some saying it would be amusing, others shaking their heads and smiling at the idea. They did not know the history, the depth of experience hidden beneath her quiet exterior, The nun herself said nothing at first. She simply observed the younger sisters, letting their laughter fill the room. There was no impatience in her gaze, only a quiet patience that came from years of knowing the value of silence. When the discussion settled, she spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "If it would help the event, I will play," she said. The room went silent. Her words were simple, yet carried a weight that made the younger sisters pause. They had not expected her to agree, and they looked at her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Over the next few days, she prepared in her usual quiet manner. She did not practice loudly, nor did she demand attention. Instead, she sat at the old piano in the common room, running her fingers gently over the keys, remembering melodies from long ago. She recalled the music she had learned before dedicating her life to the convent, pieces that had once filled grand halls with applause. Now, the notes were meant only to awaken memories, to remind herself of the skill that still lingered in her hands, in her memory. She played softly, letting the music echo lightly in the empty halls. Unnoticed by most of the sisters who were busy with preparations for the charity event, the sisters watched her in secret, some with admiration, some with doubt. How could someone so old perform in front of an audience and move them with music? They whispered to one another about the age of her hands, the softness of her movements, imagining a frail figure, unable to control the instrument. Yet there was something about the calmness in her eyes, the gentle confidence in her posture, that made some pause. They could not explain it, but there was a sense that she held something extraordinary, even if they did not yet understand it. When the day of the event arrived, the convent was bustling with activity. Tables were set with flowers, programs were arranged neatly, and volunteers moved quickly to ensure everything was in place. The elderly nun dressed in her habit, careful to ensure it was neat. Her hair tucked beneath her veil, her hands rested lightly on the folds of fabric. She moved slowly, deliberately, down the hall, to where the piano had been placed for performances. The younger sisters followed quietly, whispering encouragement, but unable to hide the concern in their voices. Could she really do this? Would the music that lived only in memory be enough to touch a crowd? As the event began, the room filled with the soft murmur of conversations. People arrived, curious to see what the convent's contribution would be. The younger sisters went first, singing and performing, their energy filling the space with laughter and applause. Then it was time for the elderly nun to play. A hush fell over the room as she approached the piano. The crowd looked up, some smiling politely, others exchanging skeptical glances. They were not expecting much, some even wondering if this was a practical joke. She sat down at the piano, her fingers hovering just above the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath. The younger sisters looked on, some anxious, some amazed at the calm dignity with which she took her place. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, a focus that went beyond the notes themselves. She was not thinking about the audience, the applause, or the opinions of others. She was thinking only of the music, of the story each note carried, of the emotions she wanted to share. When her fingers finally touched the keys, the sound was gentle at first, almost tentative. The crowd leaned in, unsure of what to expect. But as the music continued, something began to change. The notes flowed with a fluidity that seemed impossible for someone her age. Every chord, every melody, carried emotion so deep that the room became still. People stopped talking, their attention drawn completely to the sound. The music was not just heard, it was felt as if it carried the experiences of a lifetime, every sorrow and joy, every hope and regret. Woven into the rhythm of the performance, whispers of surprise moved through the audience. Some could not believe the skill in front of them. They had expected weakness, hesitation, perhaps a forgetful performance. Instead, they found mastery, elegance, and passion. The elderly nun's hands moved with precision, yet with softness, bringing each piece to life as though the piano itself were singing. Her eyes were calm, her face serene, but the music revealed the depth of her soul, a richness that words could never describe. She was not just playing, she was communicating, telling a story that the crowd could feel in their hearts. People began to notice the younger sisters in the back, whose eyes were wide with amazement. Some covered their mouths to stifle gasps, others leaned forward in their chairs. The skepticism that had filled the room dissolved completely, replaced by awe and admiration. The elderly nun's performance was not just a demonstration of skill, but a reminder that age does not limit talent, that experience can bring a depth of emotion younger performers cannot yet reach. Every note she played seemed to challenge the assumptions the audience had made. Every chord a quiet declaration of her continued vitality and strength as the performance continued. The audience became absorbed in the music. Children sat on the floor wide-eyed, not fully understanding the complexity of the melodies, but sensing the emotion in the room. Older listeners closed their eyes, letting the notes wash over them, stirring memories and feelings long forgotten. Some people wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty of the performance. The room, once filled with polite murmurs and doubt, now held a shared experience, a silent communion between the music and every listener. When the final note faded, there was a long moment of silence. The audience could not immediately comprehend what had just happened. Then, slowly, applause began. At first hesitant, then louder, stronger, until the room rang with claps, cheers, and admiration. People rose to their feet, applauding not just skill, but courage, resilience, and the quiet power of a life fully lived. The younger sisters joined in, tears in their eyes, proud and amazed at what they had witnessed. The elderly nun rose from the piano, bowed her head slightly, and gave a small, serene smile. She did not need the applause, but she accepted it gracefully. Knowing that the moment had touched hearts in a way words never could, after the performance, many came to speak with her. They asked how long she had played, where she had learned, and why she had kept her talent hidden for so long. She answered simply, without pride or boastfulness, explaining that music had always been a part of her, but her life had called her in other directions. She had not sought recognition, only the joy of expression, and now, by chance, she had shared it with the world. People listened, fascinated not just by the story, but by the humility and grace with which she spoke. The event continued, but the impact of her performance lingered. Conversations often returned to the unexpected skill, the depth of emotion, and the lesson that talent can thrive regardless of age or circumstance. Those who had doubted her left with a new understanding, their assumptions challenged by what they had experienced. Even the youngest children, who might not have understood every note, sensed the power and beauty in her playing. The elderly nun returned to the convent quietly that evening, her heart light and peaceful, knowing that she had touched lives not with words, but with music, and that the story she had carried in her soul for so many years had finally been heard. The room was buzzing with quiet conversations, laughter, and the occasional clinking of glasses as guests mingled. The charity event was in full swing, and people had begun to settle in for the scheduled performances. The elderly nun waited patiently in a corner, her hands folded in front of her. Listening to the sounds of life and excitement around her, she did not feel nervous, nor did she seek attention. She knew that when the moment came, the music would speak for her. Still, she was aware of the skepticism that lingered in the air. Some people were watching her closely, whispering to each other, and wondering if she was capable of performing at all. The younger sisters had tried to prepare the audience, speaking softly about the nun's quiet talent. But it was clear that many attendees had their doubts. Age had a way of shaping perceptions, making people believe that strength and skill faded over time. The elderly nun understood these assumptions all too well. She had lived her life in quiet patience, knowing that true value was not always immediately visible. Now she was about to show that experience and wisdom could surpass the expectations of even the most skeptical eyes. When the announcer called her name, a hush fell over the room. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people turned to look at her. Some smiled politely, expecting a brief, simple performance, while others exchanged skeptical glances. They assumed she would play a few slow notes, enough to be polite, then step away. No one anticipated what was about to happen. The elderly nun walked slowly to the piano, her steps deliberate and calm, her fingers resting lightly on the keys as she seated herself. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, centering herself before beginning. This was not a performance for applause or recognition. It was a sharing of her life, her emotions, her history. The first notes were soft and delicate, almost hesitant. The audience listened, some leaning forward with curiosity, others maintaining polite distance, unsure of what to expect. As the music continued, the sound grew richer, more confident, filled with a depth that seemed to carry years of practice and understanding. Each note was placed carefully, each chord resonating with clarity and purpose. It became clear that this was no ordinary performance. The music spoke of patience, resilience, and a quiet strength that had been nurtured over decades. Whispers began to ripple through the audience. Some could not believe the skill of the elderly nun before them. They had assumed she was too old, too frail, too quiet to command the piano in this way. Yet here she was, filling the room with music that was both powerful and gentle. Every note seemed to tell a story, a history that went far beyond the walls of the convent. She played not for recognition, but for the sheer joy of expression, and the audience could feel it. It was as if the piano had become an extension of her soul, translating emotion into sound in a way that words never could. The younger sisters watched from the back, their eyes wide with amazement. They had always known that the nun possessed talent, but seeing it come alive in front of an audience was something entirely different. Some felt a pang of regret for ever doubting her ability, while others felt a profound admiration for her courage and skill. The music transcended expectations, reaching each person in the room in a way that was personal and moving. The elderly nun was no longer just a quiet presence in the convent. She had become a storyteller, a teacher, and an inspiration. All through the language of music, as the performance progressed, the audience became completely absorbed. Children sat quietly on the floor, mesmerized by the flowing melodies, their faces reflecting wonder and curiosity. Adults closed their eyes, letting the sound envelop them, stirring memories and emotions long forgotten. Some listeners felt tears prick at their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty and depth of the performance. The room once filled with polite chatter and subtle doubt had transformed into a shared space of connection, a place where music united strangers through emotion and understanding. The elderly nun's hands moved with grace and precision, each movement deliberate, yet seemingly effortless. She did not rush, nor did she falter. The music carried her past, her experiences, and her devotion, unfolding like a story without words. Every chord resonated with emotion. Every melody revealed her inner strength and resilience. The audience began to sense the layers of her life hidden beneath her quiet demeanor. The years of dedication, the sacrifices, and the dreams that had never been forgotten. She was no longer just a figure in a habit. She was a living testament to the idea that talent and passion do not diminish with age, but rather they mature, gaining depth and richness over time. The skeptics in the crowd found themselves captivated. They had come expecting a simple, forgettable performance, but what they witnessed was extraordinary. The elderly nun challenged their assumptions with every note, proving that the human spirit, experience, and dedication could produce beauty that transcended expectations. The room was filled with awe and respect, a quiet reverence that grew as the performance continued. People who had been skeptical moments before now sat in rapt attention, completely absorbed by the music as the final notes approached. The music softened, returning to the delicate, gentle touch that had begun the performance. The room held its breath, reluctant to break the spell. The elderly nun's hands lingered on the keys for a moment longer, savoring the silence that followed before slowly rising and resting in her lap. She opened her eyes and looked at the audience, not for validation but for connection. The performance had not been about recognition. It had been about sharing a part of herself, a glimpse into the life she had lived and the experiences she had gathered. A silence lingered for a heartbeat before the audience erupted into applause. At first it was hesitant, polite clapping, but it quickly grew into a full, heartfelt response. People stood, cheering, some with tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected brilliance of the performance. The younger sisters joined in, proud and amazed, feeling a deep sense of respect and admiration for the nun who had quietly defied expectations. The elderly nun bowed her head slightly, offering a small, serene smile. She did not seek praise, yet she accepted it graciously, understanding the power of her music to touch hearts. After the performance, many attendees approached her to express their astonishment and gratitude. They asked about her training, how she had maintained such skill, and why she had kept her talent hidden for so long. She responded simply, with humility and grace, explaining that music had always been a part of her life, even if it had not been shared publicly. She spoke of her devotion to her faith, her life in the convent, and the joy she found in quiet expression. Her words were gentle, but they carried wisdom and depth, leaving a lasting impression on those who listened. The event continued, but the impact of her performance lingered. Conversations frequently returned to the elderly nun and the unexpected beauty of her music. People spoke not only of her skill, but of the lessons embedded in her story, that age does not define capability, that quiet lives can contain immense talent, and that sometimes the most profound experiences come from unexpected places. Even children who had watched with wide eyes seemed to understand, in their own way, the power of dedication, patience, and heartfelt expression. As the night came to a close, the elderly nun returned to the convent quietly, her heart at peace. She had shared a piece of herself with the world, not seeking attention or fame, but simply expressing the depth of her life through music. She knew that the memory of the performance would remain with those who had witnessed it, a reminder that true talent and strength cannot be measured by age or outward appearances. In the quiet of her room, she reflected on the evening, grateful for the opportunity to connect with others in such a meaningful way. The music had spoken, and the audience had listened, proving that the most profound expressions often come in silence, humility, and dedication. After the applause settled, there was a moment of quiet reflection in the room. People still sat in their chairs, their hearts and minds full from the music they had just experienced. The elderly nun rose slowly from the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys for a moment, as if saying a silent goodbye to the instrument that had been her companion for so many years. She turned to face the audience, noticing the expressions of surprise, admiration, and awe that filled the room. The whispers began anew, but this time they were not doubts or skepticism. They were questions, curiosity, and admiration. People wanted to know the story behind the hands that had produced such moving melodies. The younger sisters followed her quietly, their eyes wide with amazement. Some were still catching their breath, overwhelmed by the depth of the performance. They had grown up seeing her as a gentle, quiet figure, someone who moved slowly through the convent halls, performing chores with patience and care. They had never imagined that the same hands, so frail in appearance, could produce such power, precision, and emotion. It was a lesson in humility, a reminder that appearances often hide extraordinary truths. One of the event organizers approached her, a notebook in hand, eager to ask about her life and her music. She smiled softly, offering simple words that spoke volumes. She explained that music had always been a part of her, even before she entered the convent. She had trained in her youth, dedicating hours to practice and study, learning from teachers who recognized her talent. But life had taken her on a different path, one of devotion, discipline, and service. Her music had been set aside, not forgotten, but carefully preserved in the quiet corners of her mind, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The audience listened, captivated by the story that unfolded alongside the melodies they had just heard. They could see now that her talent had not appeared suddenly. It had been nurtured over years of dedication, honed in private, and carried forward with patience and humility. Her performance was not simply the product of skill, but the culmination of a lifetime of experiences, a reflection of the choices she had made and the life she had lived with quiet strength. People realized that every note had meaning, every chord had a story, and every melody was a testament to resilience and passion. The elderly nun continued to share fragments of her past, speaking softly, as if each word were a delicate brushstroke on a canvas. She spoke of her early years, of the hours she had spent at the piano, of the teachers who had inspired her, and the pieces she had loved to play. She spoke of the decision to join the convent, of the life of devotion she had chosen, and of the moments when music had been her solace, her companion in solitude. Her words were simple, but they carried depth, revealing a life rich with emotion, experience, purpose. People began to understand the significance of what they had witnessed. The performance was more than a display of talent. It was a revelation of a life that had been lived with intention and care. The elderly nun's music had transcended technical skill. It had communicated the essence of her being, her journey, and her perspective on life. Each note had carried the weight of her experiences, the joys and sorrows she had encountered, and the wisdom she had gained along the way. The audience realized that they were not merely listeners, but witnesses to a story that could only be told through the language of music. Questions continued to flow from the audience, each one met with gentle patience. Some asked about her training, others about her decision to join the convent, and some simply wanted to understand how someone could maintain such skill over the years. She answered each question with honesty and humility, sharing enough to satisfy curiosity without diminishing the mystery and dignity that had always surrounded her. She emphasized the importance of patience, practice, and devotion, explaining that true mastery comes not from recognition or applause, but from dedication and love for the craft itself. The younger sisters watched in awe. As the audience absorbed every word and every detail of the story, they had learned a valuable lesson, that age does not limit ability. Quiet lives can contain profound experiences, and that true talent often waits for the right moment to shine. They realized that the elderly nun had never sought attention or validation. Yet she had touched the hearts of everyone in the room simply by being herself and sharing her gift. It was a lesson in humility, courage, and the power of quiet strength. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The initial skepticism and doubt had been replaced by respect, admiration, and inspiration. People spoke in hushed tones, reflecting on what they had experienced, and on the lessons that could be learned from the elderly nun's life and performance. The event had become more than a gathering for charity. It had become a moment of connection, understanding, and shared humanity. The music had bridged gaps, broken assumptions, and reminded everyone present of the value of patience, dedication, and the unseen efforts that shape a life. The elderly nun returned to her seat among the sisters, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She had shared her music, her story, and a part of her life in a way that had touched others deeply. She did not seek recognition, but she understood the importance of sharing her experience. Not for herself, but for those who needed to see that talent, passion, and purpose could endure. She had shown that age is not a barrier, that the quiet moments of life are often the most meaningful, and that true mastery comes from dedication and heart rather than applause or attention. As the crowd began to disperse, many people approached her once more, expressing their gratitude, admiration, and surprise. They spoke of the lessons they had learned, the emotions they had felt, and the inspiration they had drawn from her performance and story. The elderly nun listened with gentle humility, offering kind words, nodding, and smiling softly. She knew that her role was not to dominate the moment, but to share a piece of herself in a way that allowed others to see the beauty and depth life could hold. The younger sisters were particularly moved. They had grown up seeing her as a quiet, gentle figure, but now they understood the strength, talent, and wisdom she possessed. They realized that the convent had been blessed with someone extraordinary, someone who had lived a life of devotion, discipline, and hidden brilliance. They felt pride, admiration, and a renewed sense of respect, understanding that the lessons she embodied went far beyond music. Her life was a testament to the idea that every person has value, every experience has meaning, and every talent can shine when the time is right, in the quiet of the night. After the event had ended and the last guests had departed, the elderly nun returned to her room. She reflected on the evening, feeling a sense of fulfillment and peace. She had shared her music, her story, and her heart, and in doing so, had reminded others of the importance of patience, humility, and dedication. The world outside the convent may not always recognize quiet strength or hidden talent, but in moments like these, the truth became clear. The most profound experiences often come unexpectedly, and the impact of a single performance can resonate far beyond the moment it is given. She sat by the window, looking out at the moonlit garden, her hands resting on her lap. The piano, still in the common room, seemed to hum softly in her memory, as if acknowledging the connection it had created between her and the audience. She thought about the lessons that had been shared, the hearts that had been touched, and the minds that had been opened. She realized that music, like life, has the power to bridge gaps, reveal hidden truths, and inspire people in ways that words alone cannot. The evening had been a reminder that every moment, every choice, and every quiet effort matters, and that the beauty of life often emerges in unexpected ways. The days following the charity event felt different for everyone involved. The elderly nun returned to her routine in the convent, but something had changed. The world outside her quiet life had seen a glimpse of her true self. And though she did not seek attention or praise, the experience left a warm, lingering sense of fulfillment. The younger sisters noticed it too. She moved with a quiet joy, a gentle pride that was subtle but unmistakable. It was as though the music she had shared had not only touched the hearts of the audience, but also filled a part of her own spirit that had long been waiting for acknowledgement. Visitors continued to arrive at the convent in the days after the performance. Some came to see the nun who had astonished the crowd. Others brought letters and small gifts expressing gratitude. People from the charity event returned to convey how much the music had meant to them. They spoke of their own experiences, the memories that had surfaced, and the emotions they had felt while listening. The elderly nun listened quietly, offering soft smiles and gentle words. She did not boast or seek attention. Her purpose was not to be celebrated, but to share the gift that had lived quietly within her for decades. The joy came from knowing that her music had touched lives in a meaningful way in the convent. The sisters discussed what had happened at length. They reflected on the assumptions they had made, on the doubts they had held, and on the lessons they had learned. They spoke about the power of perseverance, the value of hidden talents, and the importance of recognizing the strength and depth that can exist within a person who seems quiet or ordinary. The younger sisters were inspired, realizing that their own abilities, too, could flourish in unexpected ways if nurtured with patience, humility, and dedication. The elderly nun had taught them, without intending to, that true mastery does not require an audience, but a commitment to the craft and the heart behind it. The elderly nun herself returned to her music, sitting at the piano each evening, as she had always done. But now, there was a new sense of connection. She no longer played only for herself or for the quiet moments of reflection. She played knowing that others had heard and understood a part of her soul. The melodies seemed to carry not just her experiences, but also the gratitude, admiration, and shared emotions of those who had listened. Music, she realized, could be a bridge between hearts, transcending words, age, and appearances. One afternoon, she was asked to perform again at a small local gathering. She agreed quietly, without fanfare, understanding that this was not about fame, but about connection. The audience was smaller than the charity event, but the impact was no less profound. People listened in rapt attention, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. Some were young, some old, but all were united in the experience of her music. The elderly nun played with the same dedication, the same passion, and the same depth of emotion as before. Each note carried her history, her devotion, and the lessons she had learned over a lifetime. The audience began to realize that the performance was more than skill. It was a story told through sound, a life lived and shared with sincerity. They were moved by the quiet strength that radiated from her, the patience and discipline that had shaped her into the musician they now admired. Parents held their children close. Some tears shone in the eyes of older listeners, and younger attendees whispered in amazement. The music had a way of reaching everyone, touching hearts in ways that words never could. People left the gathering carrying the memory with them, inspired and humbled by what they had experienced back at the convent. The elderly nun found herself reflecting more deeply on life, on choices, and on the impact of sharing one's gifts. She realized that her life had always been meaningful, even if unnoticed by the larger world. The years of quiet service, the hours spent in prayer and devotion, the moments of solitude and reflection all had contributed to the person she had become. The music had always been a part of her, but now it had found a voice outside the convent, reaching people who needed to feel the emotions. She expressed through her fingers on the piano keys. Word of her performances began to spread gradually. Neighbors, local community members, and even people from surrounding towns heard of the nun whose piano had stunned crowds. Invitations came for small performances, interviews, and even workshops where she could share her knowledge. She accepted quietly, with grace, never seeking to be in the spotlight, but understanding the value of sharing her experience to inspire others. Every performance was different, yet each one carried the same truth. Age does not limit talent. A life devoted to purpose and passion can touch countless hearts. The convent itself became a place of quiet learning. People came not only to hear music, but to witness the dedication and humility of someone who had devoted her life to service. The sisters and visitors alike learned from her example, understanding that patience, consistency, and quiet strength could produce results more profound than immediate recognition. The elderly nun continued her daily routines, balancing her chores, prayers, and music. But now, with a new sense of connection to the world beyond the convent walls, she understood that her life, though quiet, had left a lasting impact. Over time, she noticed changes in the younger sisters as well. They began to approach their own talents with patience, dedication, and humility. They understood that recognition was not the measure of worth, but the impact of sharing their gifts and the effort invested in perfecting them. The elderly nun became a guide, not through lectures or instruction, but through her example and presence. Her life and music spoke volumes about resilience, devotion, and the hidden potential that exists in everyone. Her story reminded them that every life has value, every talent deserves cultivation, and every quiet effort can create ripples far beyond what is. Immediately seen, the elderly nun also reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood that moments of doubt, whether from others or herself, are natural, but they need not define one's actions. Life offers opportunities in unexpected ways, and readiness comes from persistence, patience, and faith in oneself. Her performances had not been about proving herself to the world, but about sharing a part of her soul, and the response she received was a testament to the quiet power of genuine expression. She realized that one could live a life of deep purpose without external validation, yet still touch the lives of many when the right moment arrived. In the quiet evenings at the convent, she would sit by the piano, playing softly. Reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, she remembered the doubts, the assumptions, and the skepticism that had once surrounded her. She thought about the audience, the young sisters, and the community that had been touched by her music. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that her dedication, patience, and hidden talent had finally found its voice. The music flowed effortlessly, carrying her experiences, her devotion, and the lessons of a lifetime. People continued to speak of her performances for years to come. Stories were shared, letters arrived, and the impact of her music became a quiet legend in the community. She never sought fame or recognition, but she accepted the opportunity to inspire and connect with others. Her life became a testament to the idea that age is not a limitation, that talent can endure, and that quiet dedication often produces the most meaningful results. Those who had witnessed her music learned to appreciate patience, humility, and the power of consistent effort. The elderly nun's life remained simple, filled with prayer, service, and music, but it had taken on a new significance. She understood that sharing her gift had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to recognize their own hidden talents and to cultivate them with care. She became a quiet mentor, an example of resilience, dedication, and the beauty of a life fully lived. Her story reminded everyone that appearances can be deceiving, that age is not a barrier, and that the true measure of a person lies in their actions, devotion, and the depth of their heart. In the final moments of her day, she would sit by the window, listening to the evening sounds of the convent. Reflecting on the lives she had touched and the lessons that had been learned, she understood that her journey was not over, that life continued to offer moments of connection, expression, and inspiration. Through music, patience, In quiet dedication, she had shown that the human spirit, regardless of age, could move hearts, challenge assumptions, and leave a lasting impact. And in that knowledge, she found peace, fulfillment, and the quiet joy of a life well lived.